from Councillor Crackett, and possibly apologies for lateness from both Pani Akut and Reverend Cook.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I've only just remembered that Councillor Lush is in Auckland. His 90-year-old mother died, so he's on family business.
Have we had an apology from Councillor Pottinger?
I think that you could, yes.
Given that I read he's unwell, so we'll include him in the apologies. Would somebody like to move, welcome along, Nobby, would somebody like to move that the apologies are received?
Second, Graham.
Moved Councillor Scout, seconded Councillor Lewis. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against, carried. No items of public forum. We do have a couple of submitters with regards to the dog control bylaw that we will come to very shortly. But Liam, now's your moment in the spotlight if you'd like to come up and take a seat and bring us up to date with what's been going on with the Youth Council.
All right.
Thanks for taking the time to leave school early and come along.
Oh, with pleasure.
This close to exams, really?
Oh yes, to playing it tight. Ko auraki te maunga, ko wakatipu te roto, ko takatimu te waka, ko naitahu te iwi, ko putiraki te marae, ko Verdon College te kura, ko Calder toku whānau, ko Barry toku papa, ko Catherine toku mama, ko Liam toku ingoa. Kia ora, your worship, councillors, and everyone else. What I'm about to present to you are the findings of our previous meeting at Youth Council held on the 3rd of August. Our first one is the Candidates Forum. We will be hiring Repertory Theatre for an election forum, which is something we've decided to hold for the upcoming local body elections. We'll be wanting to ask questions. The Candidates Forum is something Youth Council has organised in the past. The people running for council can share their pitch and then answer some questions relevant to the local youth. The date is set for Wednesday the 14th of September between 6 and 8 p.m. and anyone running for council and or mayoralty is more than welcome to come along to this event, and we will be sending out letters later this week. Any questions from that?
Councillors? Nope. Councillor Soper?
I believe that the 14th of September is also the date of a chamber election event, and the timing is very close to your timing. You may want to check that.
All right, thank you, Councillor. I'll look into that.
Yeah.
Also, our next meeting...
Sorry, just a moment. Councillor Clark, your question, sorry?
I can confirm that the chamber one is on 14th, Wednesday the 14th, between 6 and 8.
Thank you.
All right, I'll look into changing that. Our next Youth Council meeting on Wednesday the 31st of August will be an open meeting, and this will be open for the public and youth of Invercargill to come along, and we are here to show them the workings of Youth Council. Along with our normal meeting, we will be holding 2 workshops. One which will be about the Creative Community Scheme, and the other a policy design which 2 of our Youth Council representatives learnt at the Festival for the Future in Wellington just passed. Any questions
for Liam on that? So it's a design of policy, not a specific policy, Liam?
I'm not too sure on that. Might have to get back to you.
We'll wait for the meeting.
Hope to see you there. And our final topic we discussed at our previous Youth Council meeting was the smoke-free submission. We discussed the smoke-free bill regarding the smoking rates by 2025 and reducing retail availability. Youth Council agreed that smoking is harmful to the human body and encouraged people not to do it. We felt that our generation are much more informed and aware of the health risks of smoking, so we feel more likely they're not likely to smoke in adult years. Anyhow, therefore reducing the harm caused by smoking across the population in years to come. It definitely comes down to the personal choice rather than being in fashion. Youth now get the picture of all consequences of smoking. Youth Council felt that tighter regulation should be across all stores that sell vape products. Youth Council did not fully agree on the age limits, that people born after the 1st of January 2009 should not be able to buy smoking and tobacco products. We did take a vote, and it was 1/3 for and 2/3 against. Thank you.
Thank you. The discussion around vaping, can you elaborate on that a little more? What was some of the feedback that came from the meeting, Liam?
We did find that specialist vape stores that sell only vapes, more harsh restrictions should be on them, so only a certain amount of flavours, or just to get people off smoking. So vaping was designed to help people come off smoking, not to introduce people to nicotine and smoking, which is a problem with youth.
So, and again, look, if it wasn't discussed, please feel free to tell me so, but I'm curious to see if there was any concern about what anecdotally seems to be an increasing trend in the popularity of vaping with youth.
Yes, it is a problem, and hopefully this submission can sort of get a grasp on it before it gets too out of hand.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Skelt.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just the point you made around the age and the voting, could you extrapolate that out a wee bit for me, just in how the group came to those decisions, or that decision?
We felt that people should now know the risks of smoking. I was personally for the ban because I think that this is harmful for our future generations. Let's hope people cannot grow up smoking and harming themselves. But I think another side of the argument was people do have a right to their own choice, and it could be restricting for their own choice.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Liam, one of my frequent questions has been over the years, and I'm not necessarily asking you for an answer right now, but may I ask you to consider in Youth Council whether or not we should have a policy on non-smoking in our areas or a ban on non-smoking. Policy to me is a little bit softer than a bylaw which prohibits this smoking in our areas. So could I ask you respectfully if you could bring that to the Youth Council and ask if you should be looking at a policy or a bylaw? Thanks, Liam. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'll also be in attendance at that meeting, so I'll make sure it's raised, but we need to be aware that a bylaw comes with the burden of enforcement. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Liam, for that. Just a couple of questions in relation to the stop smoking by 2025. What's the Youth Council's view on the practicality of actually having no cigarette use or sale or use within 3 years, given that I think at this end of the country we have one of the highest rates of participation in smoking?
We at Youth Council really don't see much hope for New Zealand to be smoke-free by 2025. But if we can push that gate out a little bit further with people not being able to buy cigarettes after the being born after the 1st of January 2009, that goal soon becomes more closer, and hopefully we can achieve that.
And just a follow-up question, Chair. Program on TV recently, Liam, about the issues of vaping, and in particular the addition of nicotine into the vaping apparatus, which is the addictive part, I guess. And I just wonder what your view was on whether the regulations that come in should prohibit nicotine in the vaping as well, and just have the flavouring stuff, because it was clear that people were getting addicted to the nicotine. Now, it's my understanding at the moment that the government does regulate this issue of nicotine in vaping, but it sort of doesn't monitor it, and it's a little bit open slather with the businesses that are selling it.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Hopefully, soon we'll look into that, because we only just did cover the smoking bylaw, not the nicotine.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any other questions? If not, thank you for coming along, Liam. Lots of questions for you today, and appreciate your engagement with us. Councillors, the recommendation is that the Youth Council report is received. Would somebody like to move?
Happy to move.
Councillor Soper, seconded Councillor Kett. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thanks, Liam.
Thank you.
We will now hear the submissions for the dog control bylaw. Our first submitter is Miss Wendy Joy Baker, who will get on the phone. So we'll just pause for a moment whilst we get her. Good afternoon, Wendy.
How are you?
Good. It's Darren speaking. Welcome along to the Performance Policy and Partnerships meeting, and thank you also for your submission on the dog control policy and bylaw. You're well familiar with the process of a submission, so really the floor is yours for the next few minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a bit hard to hear you, Darren, but hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
So I'll just quickly go through my submission, which you should have in front of you. And as I said, good afternoon to all of you. Hope the day is as lovely as it is out here, nice and sunny. So my first part of the submission is just to say that in 2016, there were larger dogs on lead signage installed at Queen's Park. You can see the example there. And I wondered, please, if these could be reinstated, as I noticed they are not there now. And there's just the smaller dogs on lead signs on the main entrance sign. I just feel that's quite important that they're quite clear. Also, could there be, please be rewards for good dog owners who set a good example by having their dogs on lead in relevant areas throughout Invercargill. I think it's really good to reward dog owners, you know, whether your officers are out and about and see someone who's being really good with their dog and putting it on the lead and that. I think it's nice to reward and congratulate them. Also, additionally, well done to ICC for having lots of areas for exercising dogs off lead and updating the maps in your bylaw. I just feel on the next point that all playgrounds should have no dog signage, no dogs allowed for safety reasons. And I've always sort of campaigned for that. Moving on to the next point, enforcement. Well done again. I think in your bylaw it is responsible that ICC have included the Dog Control Act
Thanks, Wendy. If I could just kick the ball off with your request around Section 5 of the Dog Control Act to be part of the bylaw, there really is no point in duplicating existing legislation, but would you be happier if we made sure that those points were communicated to people through an education program rather than including them in the bylaw, so that they're more likely to be aware of them in a softer, friendlier way?
No, not really, because if you've got the infringement information, that is relevant to what is in the obligations of dog owners, and I think it's totally part of it should be totally part of your bylaw. So, sorry, Darren, but I think it's the whole education approach. Yeah, I appreciate that you are out there doing education, and like I said, it's proactive, and I mentioned that before. But I think if you're going to put the infringement information in, then I would please request that you put those obligations of dog owners in that section 5. It's not a big amount of to put in. I think it's a reasonable request. Thanks.
Noted, but the infringement information is something that we are actually in control of. Councillor Kett.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Wendy, Peter speaking. On bullet point 2 here, you asked if we could reward good and responsible dog owners that set good examples. What type of reward do you think that if we did go ahead with your idea, what could we reward them with? What type of thing? Did you have anything in mind?
That's a good point. I haven't really given much thought to that, but just what popped into my head just now was maybe a voucher from a pet store or something like that. Just not too big, but just something easy for your officers to carry around, and just something small and a token of appreciation. Yeah,
a certificate and maybe a small bit.
Yeah, a certificate would be really good. Good idea.
And a small bag of dog biscuits to boot, eh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good idea.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Councillors, any other questions for Wendy? If not, thank you, Wendy, again for your submissions and your interests, and for taking the time to join us for the hearing this afternoon. Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye.
Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Enjoy the sun. Ron, would you like to take a seat? Sorry, can I just check? Are you comfortable with me addressing you as Ron?
That's perfectly fine, yeah.
Thank you. You can take your mask off if you're more comfortable like that. Just makes it a little easier to hear. The floor is yours. I had a chance to read through your submission, and here's an opportunity for you to speak to it.
Yeah, sorry for the informal approach, but I feel like having an involvement in democracy is quite intimidating for like the general public and little people like me who just sit in the background and slowly observing what's going on without having really any sort of feel like you had any control other than maybe a vote that you did 4 years ago. So thanks for hearing me. I'd first like to say that I didn't really feel that having a say was very accessible. I didn't find any forms for submitting, and ended up just writing on a bit of paper I found beside the submission box, and I couldn't actually find the dog control policy hard copy. The bylaw was when I went to the library and to the city council, I didn't actually see a copy of it beside the submission box, or even then. So I just some general feedback around being more open and to the public, I think was very important as you guys roll going forward into leading the community and being seen as a voice. I mean, as a sort of an ear to the public. So thanks. I can't really remember what I wrote in jest at the time. I must have just been feeling like exercising my rights. but I think it was around the time when I was making payments for my own dog registration. I recall last year having quite a nasty surprise that the fees had gone up 50% for the late fees, and I would just thought I'd like to submit that I don't think that was a very inclusive decision-making process. And actually, I looked on the summary pages for the annual plan fees increases, and noticed that on the animal control subject line it said no significant changes, and I looked back into 2019-20 and it also didn't have any significant. I mean, actually the 19-20 annual plan fee increase on the dog control side of things was quite informative, but relative to the 2021 COVID excuses that people have seemed to have dragged on, it sort of I was quite shocked to see that it was labelled as not a significant change, but really on paper, when it comes down to actually paying for the fees, 50% is a significant increase. And I just wanted to know if there's any evidence of any submissions or any people in support of the increase that made the councillors aware of their support for the increase, or whether the councillors were aware what they were voting on at the time, and what the reasons were for the increase. Sorry, specifically bringing up the annual plan on this small bylaw change, but would anyone like to answer the question, or can they?
So you can ask questions rhetorically.
Remember, well, I don't know. Is that a rhetorical question?
That's how I'm going to treat it, because we're not going to sit here and answer it. All submitters can ask questions rhetorically, and council may respond. The issue of fees and process around it does come up on the agenda a little bit later on. All the submissions that were received are actually a part of public record, so you're able to search through them and see what comments were made.
I wasn't able to find even a brief look. I mean, I don't have Microsoft on my phone, so I found that the Word X files were actually not compatible with my phone, so there was a lack of sort of ability to look up some documents. I think PDFs might be a slightly more accessible form of file.
So you'd be able to make use of the computers at the library, which would make it more accessible and easier to go through that way if you wish.
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, I'm working on being more able to get around town with these 50% discounts on public transport have been helpful. But so is there anyone who can?
So again, I'm going to say you can ask that question, but it's going to be treated rhetorically. No one here is going to answer it.
No. Okay.
Well, we can ask
going forward. And next time there's some changes in significant policy that affects individual people, like people who have dogs, or maybe people who are considering having dogs, but you might not be able to keep a track of that. But maybe ask, as a member of the councillors, ask people who already own dogs who are directly affected by your decisions that you make on behalf of community. Maybe ask for the community's input. I know that you have been given sort of, what's that word? You've been given the table to just make votes on behalf of the community. So maybe going forward, actually ask the community what their thoughts are, maybe before making those kind of decisions that affect them, or even have some solutions available, or reasons around why those increases are being made. Is it for compliance, to increase compliance, or is there a specific type of people who you don't want owning dogs, or is it making it harder to? Is it some sort of underlying conflicts of interest that perhaps are not really coming to the table when you make those decisions.
So, see if I can answer that. We try to engage with the public as much as possible, which is becoming increasingly difficult as people's methods of getting information become more and more diverse. But we're doing so on so many issues that sometimes people either miss a request for engagement or they don't feel that it would be worth doing. It is, obviously, but we do try. So I guess your suggestion of when there are issues affecting animal owners, looking at some way of making use of our existing database and making them aware that there is a policy out that they may wish to voice an opinion on is taken on board. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Your request for dog registration fees to be paid in instalments, can I ask, if we were to go through and look at that, do you think it is fair for us to add a small charge for it being done in instalments? Because I can't think of any place that allows payment by instalment at just the flat original rate. Or am I wrong?
Oh, I'm not sure what the actual costs would be involved with having your IT set that up, but I find the rates payments are quite convenient, having them coming out weekly or monthly or whatever. So I mean,
so you're talking about by automatic payment? Yeah,
it might be suitable for some people. I mean, just having that option there could be quite beneficial for some who don't have, a lump sum at the end of the week, but do enjoy having the company of a companion flatmate, for example.
It's a good suggestion. Thank you. I'll take that on board. Councillors, any other questions? No? Well, you've given us some great food for thought.
Yep.
And we appreciate that, and also the fact that you've had the courage to make a submission and come along this afternoon. Thank you very much for it.
Thanks everyone for hearing my thoughts.
Thank you. Councillors, we will come to the bylaws a little later in the meeting. Our next issue is the minutes of the Wellbeing Fund. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that these minutes be accepted. Since some of the more intricate details are in public excluded for commercial reasons, I'd just like to thank our committee very much, because this is possibly the last community wellbeing meeting, apart from one this Thursday, that people may be involved with. Particularly, I would like to mention the staff who do so much work behind the scenes, trying to make the facilities for applications very easy for the general public. And that really perhaps reflects on the quality of the staff that we have. And I thank them very, very much for their input. But I so move that the minutes be received, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a seconder?
Second it.
Councillor Soper, thank you. Any questions? If there are none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. We come to the minutes of the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee back on the extraordinary meeting back on the 12th of July. We need those minutes confirmed. If somebody would like to move.
I'll move that way.
Reverend Cook and Councillor Skelt. Questions or comments? If there are none, I'll put that motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. Right. Now we come back to the deliberations and start with the dog control report. Excuse me while I find the appropriate page. There we go. So we're back on page 8. Right, welcome along. Thank you. You've had a chance to read through the submissions, which we'll go through the process of receiving very shortly, but also hearing the feedback from those who spoke to the submissions this afternoon. Any recommendations or feedback that you'd like to give as a result of hearing those, or of the consultation process in general?
Mr. Chair, I've just got a wee bit prepared if I can read out if you don't mind first, and then happy to answer any questions you may have after that.
Please.
So the dog control policy and bylaw were adopted for consultation at the June PPP and then open for consultation for 5 weeks. We sent letters out to every registered dog owner in Invercargill, and on top of that we had the usual social media and other sort of advertising we could use. In total we received 14 submissions. The submission numbers may appear low, however they are consistent because when we consulted in 2018 on a dog control policy and bylaw, we received 16 back then. The submissions were varied, with many focusing on different areas of concern to them. Upon reviewing the submissions, council officers have recommended a number of minor amendments as a direct result of the submissions from the community. I now pass over to Gillian, who will cover off on a few more technical points.
The main change proposed to the policy and bylaw was around the menacing dogs classification. There were several submitters who made reference to this section and their feedback was mixed. Currently, the menacing dog section of the bylaw and policy are out of alignment and with the intent of the Act. The proposed changes are not as stringent as the current requirements and will see dogs classified as menacing handled in a more consistent manner. It's not foreseeable to mitigate all risks that are associated with dogs, and council officers believe that we have the balance right between the dog owners and the safety to the community.
You're happy to hear any questions that the councillors may have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You'll have heard the feedback anecdotally around rewards for dog owners who have their animals on leash. With regard to the policy and bylaw, is there any value in us including those parts of section 5 that Wendy referred to in her submission, or is it unnecessary duplication?
There would be a level of duplication involved across the bylaw and policy where parts of the obligations listed in section 5 are mentioned in other areas. So it would involve a degree of rewriting to ensure that we don't have duplication across the bylaw.
What about steps that we can take to make dog owners aware of those obligations? What do we do outside of the policy and bylaw currently?
There's certainly work that we could do around education, looking at our the information that we have on our website, updating our dog owners manual, to which there is a link on the website as well, and we could also take advantage of communications via social media, etc.
Although it's not technically part of this process, I understand, because it comes down to fees and charges, but we have noted the suggestion/query around payment by instalments or automatic payments, so I guess that's something that we can note and bring up for discussion through the new term. I don't think we'd be able to make amendments through this process. Reverend Cook, you have that pensive look about you.
Very well observed, Mr. Chair. I had a question about, which was about the same thing, about whether it's a matter of putting a link to the actual clause in the Act rather than duplicating it, because I agree it's totally unnecessary, but in some places perhaps it's linked to and you can just, by clicking the URL or whatever, you can just take yourself to that place in the Act, and that saves us putting in things that are redundant and puts a little bit more onus back on the dog owner if they're really that keen to be in compliance, that they would make that effort to do the check, and if that's something that's a quite simple technical fix, and whether we could do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's achievable to embed hyperlinks to other areas, so yeah, that's not a problem. I think what we've discussed when we saw that submission was most of section 5 that was referred to, it does permeate through the policy and the bylaw already, so we can add in a link, say, so for more thorough reference, please refer to this, Yeah, but that's certainly achievable.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a question for the staff in relation to one of the issues that was raised by Ron, as opposed to payment by instalment, which I'm not sure I'm keen on, given that the dog fee's not that large, certainly not for a responsible owner. Is there some mechanism like we have with rates where if somebody was in dire straits financially that they could approach council for some sort of consideration about some sort of delay or interim payments? That I'm not sure of. It would be interesting to know that.
Council has an arrangement with Jubilee Budget Advisory Services whereby they can work with Jubilee and Jubilee will pay the dog registration fees on behalf of the dog owner and work with them to have it repaid directly to Jubilee Services.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful to know.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? If there are none, councillors, that brings us to the recommendations. There are 7 of them, which includes receiving the report, receiving the submissions, receiving late submissions from both Ainsley Wilson and the SPCA, noting the submitters, the recommendation that council adopt the revised dog control policy, which incorporates the changes as listed around definitions, general health and welfare, barking dogs, and menacing by breed. Appendix 2 with the addition of text to clarify dog owners' responsibility in multi-use parks and reserves, and F, dog off-leash maps, and further recommend to council to adopt the revised dog control bylaw, which includes the changes as listed following consultation around Section 4, Section 5, 9.1, 15.1, 17.7.3, Appendix 1, and the dog off-leash maps. Is there a mover for those?
Happy to move those.
Councillor Soper and seconded Councillor Scout. Councillors, if you have any comments or suggestions to make, now's the opportunity. If there are none, and I'll also take this moment to note to those people who had provided written only submissions that councillors have gone to the trouble of reading them and reassuring them that they have formed part of this decision making process. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. That brings us to tab 8. Which is the deliberations around the keeping of animals, poultry and bees bylaw. Again, there are 3 recommendations that the report's received, that the submissions are received, nobody asked to speak further, and the recommendation that the bylaw is adopted by council. Somebody like to move? Oh, sorry, actually before that, are there any comments that we want to make from a staff level? Having been through the process sure. and recognising that there have been some, is response to some of the feedback we've received.
Cool, thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the same manner as the dog control policy and bylaw was adopted at the June PPP, the consultation for 5 weeks, with 6 submissions in total received. The submissions were varied, with many focusing on different clauses. The main changes proposed to the current bylaw were introducing the appeals hearing panel and strengthening language that permitted council to order the removal of livestock in the urban area if they are causing a nuisance. And we note that no submissions were against those particular 2 significant changes. However, council officers have noted similar feedback and will happily use that to shape some of the information we might have on our website or other material just to help bolster some of those areas. Otherwise, yeah, we believe the bylaw was consulted on is good and should remain extant.
Thank you. It was interesting to note the feedback around the composition of the hearings committee, but it does sit under the delegations register on council's website. I guess whether there's a hyperlink to that, it's irrelevant, but I guess we note that. So Councillor Scout, you were indicating preparedness to move, and Councillor Soper seconded, which leaves it on the table and open for comment. or questions? Reverend Cook.
So, I don't know why I didn't notice this earlier, but on page 118 of board books, keeping of cats and kittens. In a previous life, I was a cat breeder. I wonder there is no mention of registration of catteries, like not boarding catteries, but breeding catteries. And I wonder how this particular bylaw, if it was enacted assertively, might negatively impact on people doing that. Because just as we have people who keep dogs and have multi-dog households for purposes of having breeding animals, there are people who have cats for the same purpose. And generally speaking, those cats are confined to quarters, because when you've paid over $1,000 for a breeding cat, you don't want it going and mixing with any neighbourhood, Tom, Dick or Harry. So my question is really to the staff.
Actually, I can help.
Can you?
Because we changed the policy. The policy came about as a result of an issue that we had to deal with, where there was somebody who had a large number of cats. And so while it sits as a part of the bylaw that there's a maximum of 3 cats, it's not something enacted unless there is a nuisance value that is reported. So if somebody complains about a genuine nuisance value, that is then investigated, and if that's the case, then the owner may be requested to drop numbers back to 3. So in the instance you're citing where there are breeders, as you say, generally they are very responsible owners and look after their particularly expensive felines. Does that help?
I feel reassured. However, in a technical sense, I wonder, I did notice that some of the feedback we had was about people who didn't like the particular species of animal that somebody was keeping, malicious complaints, whether a person in this situation might be vulnerable to a malicious complaint and how we would protect them in that sense. But I thank you for your comment and your clarification. I am reassured.
I think there's a high degree of common sense that's applied around it, first of all at a staff level, and then if need be, there is a hearings process that somebody's able to go through where it's independently assessed. But I think it would be a pretty high threshold to try and achieve that nuisance value for a responsible owner. And we also need to recognise on the other side, for both dogs and cats, there are people who just don't like them, and we become attuned to their sensitivities as well. Councillor Kett.
Thank you, Chairman. Under the bylaw of pigeons, is there anything there that covers racing pigeons? The reason I ask that, because a number of years ago there were a number of owners had their lofts inside the city boundary, and one of them was known to have 200 pigeons in Chelmsford Street. That was a huge number. So, and there's going to be a resurgent in pigeon racing in Southland, I understand. So, what, if you got anything there that would cover that?
Just while the staff look through it, I'm guessing practically that there might be the same consideration around nuisance value. And if somebody can have 200 racing pigeons at their place and not cause them to be a nuisance, they should first of all be congratulated. But I guess it's something, if it's coming back in vogue, that we need to be aware of. Is there anything specific in the policy that refers to racing pigeons?
There's nothing specific, no. There's the general section on keeping of poultry.
I'm not sure that pigeons would be classified as poultry, though, would they?
Let's see what.
It's quite interesting. When the loft was in Chelmsford Street, it was between Wilton and Salford. I knew the owner quite well, and he'd let them out for their daily fly, and they'd just come around and block out the sun completely. It was unreal. But they didn't land on people's houses because they come back in to have their one of their daily meals. So they come back straight into the loft and into the food. So
they are, just having a look at definitions, they are captured in there and amongst poultry.
Right.
Thanks for the question. Any others? It's been moved and seconded, councillors. I'll put that motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. Which brings us to the dog control report, Gillian.
So the dog control annual report is a requirement under Section 10A of the Dog Control Act. Section 10A is quite prescriptive in the details that we need to include in the annual report. You'll note that in the report to PPP that we have included the request type data for the 2021-2022 year and the 2020/2021 year. And that we can see that there is a downwards trend against all request types except for neglect. Happy to take any questions on the report.
Councillors, there are two recommendations. Would somebody like to move? Councillor Scout, seconded by Councillor Soper. It's open for questions. If there are none, I'll just check that the report goes up on the website after this.
Yes,
or after minutes received at council.
No, it gets accepted here and it will go up onto the website.
Wonderful, thank you for that.
DIA.
I'll put the motion then. All in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Morris. That brings us to the fees and charges under the Dog Control Act. Do you want to take us through this, please?
Yes, tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, this paper came about following a comment from a member of the public letting us know that there was a procedural error that he had identified. We had the opportunity to look at it, and with all events, when we get told about something that's potentially procedurally done incorrectly, we take the opportunity to investigate it and have a look and learn from it if there is something to be learned. And in this case, there was. Obviously, we have identified the issue that the paper highlights, and we have brought the paper forward so we can correct the issue and also made sure that in a similar event again, such an outcome would not happen. So quite simply, all the paper is seeking to do is to have this committee formally adopt the fees and charges for the Dog Control Act for the 2022-2023 year. As you will have seen in the paper, once the matter is delegated to a committee by council, the council cannot make a decision on that, overriding the delegation to the committee. And that's essentially what had happened in this case when the request was made to hold the fees at last year's level. And so with that as an overview and an outcome, I'm very happy to answer any questions.
I'm happy to move the two recommendations to put them on the table, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seconded. Seconded by Councillor Abbott. Thank you. So, sorry, Michael, can you just clarify for me, are we able to, at this committee level, bring in the recommendation that was made by council, or is there a delay to that process?
This committee is able to bring in that recommendation because the council's decision that it made was essentially ultra vires to it.
Right.
So the decision made today will be the decision that lawfully adopts these fees and charges for the upcoming year.
At the amount that we intended at council. Yes. Incorrectly. Thank you. Hopefully that clarifies everything. Councillor, is there any further questions or comments that you'd like to make? If not, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Yep. Sorry, only at the table. But noted. Carried. Thank you. Performance report for the year ended 30 June. Rhiannon and Patricia. Or just Patricia. Oh no, there's Rhiannon hiding behind the pole. Welcome along.
Kia ora, councillors. Yep, I was just hiding behind the pillar. Here I am. So This paper provides you with an overview of the results of the Q4 performance update. So I'll just go over briefly the results from the levels of service performance, and then Patricia's going to speak to the financial performance. It's important to note that for both of these types of data, these are provisional results, and obviously there is still some data to come in and the auditing process to happen before the annual report. So in terms of the levels of service, you will see from the report that 66 of 99 measures were achieved this year. That's 67%. That is almost exactly the same as the final result in the annual report last year, which was 68% of measures achieved. There's no doubt that COVID has continued to have an impact on the results this year, but probably one of the most important things to take away from this report is that core services, including safe water services, were maintained right the way through the period. There was, however, an impact on those services that are open to the public, particularly in the leisure and recreation area, which in many cases saw a decline in visitor numbers over the period. Generally, though, we can see that trend starting to reverse and pick up again in Q4. So as you look at these results, it's just worth considering these are cumulative results, and so this is the story that's been building across the year. So on that note, I'll just pass on to Patricia.
So, kia ora, councillors. As Rhiannon has mentioned, the financial results were included within this report are what we'd call management results for the quarter. The variances provided are against the forecast, the last forecast that council received, which was at March. We will provide, when we bring the draft annual report to council at the end of September, we will provide commentary against the long-term plan numbers at that point, because as we adjusted during the year, the variances are a little different. So where we have landed at the moment is an operating surplus of 7.9 million. That's slightly higher by 2.3 than what we had forecast, and that's predominantly due to surplus, subsidies, that we received some additional subsidy revenue than what we thought, as we got some additional revenue in from NZTA or Waka Kotahi, and there was some more Three Waters subsidy revenue. We are going through that subsidy revenue with a fine-tooth comb to make sure we put it in the right years and make sure we're recognising it in the year that it needs to be recognised before audit arrives. From a capital perspective, we have delivered $49.9 million of capital. That is our biggest capital delivery year, and it's actually 68% of what we had put in the long-term plan. So that's a significant increase, and that performance should be noted. And there's some more projects which have completed in July, so that could have been a little bit higher. The net debt balance is sitting at 43.3 million. That's higher than forecast by 4.7, and that's principally because we used some of our cash reserves instead of borrowing towards the last part of the year, though we did go and borrow 12.8 million in the last quarter, which was to fund the loan that we have to Invercargill Central Limited, but that loan has no impact on net debt because it's offset by an asset loan. So those are the questions, my summary there. Any questions, councillors?
Thanks, Patricia. We'll take the 5 recommendations as one, and indeed note, as you correctly pointed out, the level of the capital program that's been conducted. I mean, our Commonwealth Games team has just set a few records, and work volume wise with capital works, we've gone and done the same. Simply want to move the 5 recommendations. Councillor Scout and Reverend Cook. It's open for questions or comments. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the opening statement there by Rhiannon and Patricia that talks to recommendation 3 on page 134, all the books. It talks there about a surplus of 7.9, which is influenced by $2.3 million higher than forecast. So if you subtract that off, we're left with 5.6. So I just want to be clear that our forecast prior to this 2.3 pushing up was $5.6 million. Am I correct with that? That was the year-end result before the influence of the 8.3 million revenue from government subsidies for capital projects kicking in?
Patricia?
Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair, the 5.6 million surplus forecast at March was included a subsidy reforecast at that time. So it was an additional 2.3 on top of the 5.6 that we were forecasting for the year end back in March.
So just a supplementary question to that, through you, Chair. So if we have either 5.6 or 7.9 as a surplus for this financial year, it begs the question why we pushed rates up recently by a further $1.5 million over what we had in the long-term plan, when we've got what is quite a healthy surplus there.
Through you, Mr. Chair. That, while we call it an operating surplus, a large portion of that, in fact, I think 8.3 million of subsidies is actually subsidy for a capital expenditure. So from a rates funded number is much lower. And when we bring the annual report back, I will include in that report what that actual true operating rates surplus or deficit is.
So noting that these are preliminary figures.
Yes.
Yes, but surely if we had not got the 8.3 government subsidy, if for argument's sake that hadn't arrived, we would have had a surplus on our bottom line of 5.6 or 7.9 million. So that's somewhere between 6 and 8% surplus on an operating level. That's a rather healthy budget surplus. When at the same breath we're asking for additional rates out of ratepayers.
Patricia, is that an accurate representation?
That wouldn't be an accurate representation. If we hadn't received the 8.3 million of government subsidy, we would have actually had an operating deficit of whatever I'll do some quick maths in my head, of less than $1 million.
Okay, just for me moving forward, Chair, I've got a series of about a dozen questions.
Just before we push on, just further to that, Michael, is there anything you'd like to add? Then I'll come back to your questions, Councillor.
Yes, through yourself, Chair, just wanted to highlight that those government subsidies, while we record them in our operational accounts and need to, there's two types of government subsidies. One is an operational subsidy, and the other one is for our capital works. We can come back with those two split, which would clearly show, which we will do in the annual accounts, which will clearly show, which Patricia is indicating, what the rates impact side of it is. That will highlight which that net position is. But as you will see, if there were no subsidies, we would be in a deficit position from that perspective.
Councillor Clark.
On page 135 of the report going forward, this board book's reference, it makes reference to change revaluations yet to be undertaken. I thought we had advised Audit New Zealand a few months ago that we would not be doing the revaluation until 2023.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we've actually advised them in the 21 financial year that we wouldn't be doing any revaluations that year, and we would be doing them all at 30 June 2022.
So that's this year, underway, process underway now?
Process is well through, we're just waiting on final reports.
But sorry, can you just run the date again? Are you saying the revaluation was done at June or July 2022?
30 June 2022.
Okay, thank you. On page 136, and again repeated on page 143, just need some clarification. I've asked many times for the issue around personnel costs to be broken down, And I just want to clarify one quite simple matter. On the in the reports on those 2 pages, 136 and 143, is it fair for me to assume that contractor, consultant and legal costs, which are paid through the AP system as opposed to the payroll system, are actually in what is referred to there as other expenses, which are forecast at $50.7 million?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the extent that those costs are relate to operational projects, you're correct. Where they relate to capital projects, they are not shown in that other expenses number, and they're showing in the balance sheet under capital.
Okay, thank you. On page 163, there's a reference to solid waste and the need for better education. And I've not been the only councillor in the last 12 months that has asked the question, which I'm about to ask, is that it's all very well to do education about people putting the right stuff in the right bins. The consequences are that if they do poorly in that area, we have contaminated waste that we can't then recycle, or we have additional waste going out to landfill, which now has an additional cost. And I wonder why the organisation has not replaced the 2 bin checkers we used to have a couple of 3 years ago. It used to go around ahead of the curbside pickup and check the bins. When the bins were checked and there was breaches of what should be in which bin, the ratepayer got a notice, and if there was repeat behaviour there was a small fine. And so I wonder why we've not used that mechanism to reinforce what's an important issue here, because there are some increased costs and some increased weights as well with not doing so.
Mr. Gibbling.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Councillor, we are working with our contractor to look at putting in a bin inspection program again. One of the reasons why we have taken our time on this is there are quite a number of health and safety concerns as we undertake these audits. That has been one of the factors that have led to a delay. And so, but we are working with the contractor now to find a way in order to undertake these.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you for that. On page 168 of the Animal Services part of the report, the comments that are below, the commentary that's below the actual figures is unclear. I wonder if I can get some clarification for that. It's around about what capital work has already been done versus the actual expenditure. So that's issue number 1. And the other issue for me in that area is, do we have any understanding yet about how much we have in reserves for animal services, which was raised several months ago?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So in relation to the animal care facility renewals, I presume, Councillor Clark, that is where that capital question is related to.
Sure.
The actual spend for the year is 236,000. It was noted that in the LTP we had planned to spend 471,000, but we noted that there's been some shifting of work between the 22 financial year and the 23 financial year. So some work was pulled backwards and a lot of work has been pulled forward. So that's why there was less spend than was planned, but more than was forecast, just to be confusing. And in relation to the Animal Control Fund balance, that is in its final reviews and will be with you at the next PPP meeting.
Thank you. So on page 172, in relation to regulatory services, there's a statement that says additional resources are now in place. And that's because of our inability at that stage, it would appear, to meet the obligation of 100% around consents, which is one of the KPIs. It records it at 85%. So when you say additional resources, what does that actually mean?
Just one moment. I'm not sure that's on.
Got there in the end, through you, Mr. Chair. Additional resources in that context, we're referring to the fact that we've partnered up with some more planning contractors who are assisting us with processing resource consent applications on our behalf.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you for that. On page, on one of the further pages, it talks about earthquake-prone buildings in the primary building area, which is predominantly the CBD, and it's got a KPI of 20% of the blocks identified will be done, and then the KPI result was 100%. So that's a little bit unclear for me. Does that mean that of the 20% target that we've set, we've got 100% of that 20%, or does it mean 100% of all the buildings in that priority building area have been designated under earthquake-prone buildings?
Jonathan, can you help?
Again, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, that target is that we have assessed 100% of the buildings in the priority area as being potentially earthquake-prone, which we've now met. So we haven't deemed them to be earthquake-prone. We've assessed them as being potentially earthquake-prone, i.e., they fit the criteria for the construction used in earthquake-prone buildings.
So just seeking some clarification on that. So does that mean that we've asked the building owners, if we believe they are earthquake prone, to go through the process of getting an engineering report to identify whether there are issues?
That's correct. So we identify whether they fit in one of the three criteria, and then we approach the owner to verify whether they are indeed earthquake prone.
Okay, and the last question on that cluster is the issue around the museum itself, the Pyramid Museum. Has that been classified, and if so, what category was it classified as, in category 1 or 2?
So if I could just request some clarification on the categories that you refer to. Are you talking about the percent of new build standard, percentage of MBS?
No, in the original building code, it refers to category 1 and category 2 buildings. So category 1, to my understanding, is buildings that are on arterial roads where emergency services may be impeded if the building collapses. And in those cases, they have 12.5 years to remedy the work. And category 2 buildings are ones that don't fall into that category. They're not on arterial roads and it would interfere with emergency services. And they have 25 years from designation to repair the work.
Okay, so my understanding is that it does sit within a priority area, in which case it would be 12.5 years.
Just a further question on that. The definition of a priority or a category 1 building is set down in the legislation, so in the building code. And I just wondered what the view of staff was around us setting a standard that supersedes that. So for argument's sake, I could understand if most of the CBD was deemed to be a category 1 area because vehicles would need to move up and down those streets. But it's a bit of a stretch for me to include a museum that sits out not only on Gala Street, which would be a priority roading area, but actually about 50 or 80 metres back from the road. Even if it collapsed, it's not interfering with anything. So why isn't it category 2 with a 25-year compliance time?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding is that the priority areas were set by public consultation. They've been agreed to by council. It's not for the council officers to set them.
Essentially, it's recognised as being on Gala Street. There is no recognition of the distance back from the street frontage.
I guess it makes it difficult for council, and I'm talking generically about council, if we want to address this issue, given that we own the building, we are the regulatory services about earthquake-prone buildings, and we've also gone through a process of designating a priority area. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch for me to say that a museum that sits that far back from Gala Street would be deemed to be a category 2 risk.
Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. As I remember it, this is a council decision that was made. We clearly drew the maps to include that area. And I think if there is a question to be asked about a council decision that has been made about this issue, then it can be addressed in another way other than further questioning of staff who have quite rightly indicated that they can hardly comment on an already made council decision any further.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Soper. Don't have any issue with that. Clearly, a legal opinion would be required on this. That's fine. And the second to last issue for me is on page 190. It refers to Don Street having an operating surplus of $895,000. And we've had this issue before in a previous financial report. But what it doesn't say in the report, or what it does say in the commentary, is this does not include the annual interest costs that are applicable. So interest is actually interest, but it could also be some degree of reducing the debt loading that might be sitting in our overall debt portfolio, even though it's not attached to that building. So I guess my question is, while it looks on paper to be earning nearly $900,000 worth of operating surplus, the true picture is much less than that. So I wanted to know from staff, how much do we pay in interest on that project per year? And are we making any attempt over and above that to reduce our borrowing or debt capital ceiling in relation to that project?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The reason why we haven't allocated interest yet is that it's a separate process that we wouldn't normally do as quickly as possible as we're trying to get the report out. It's happening at the moment, and you'll see it in the annual report. We do expect that the interest cost is nowhere near $800,000, and any surplus will reduce the net debt as relates to the Don Street building. So it will effectively reduce its borrowing, the debt attached to it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the very last one for me is on page 195. Kia Marama has a $44,000 underspend on its funding forecast. Some reason for that? We forecast quite a significant amount of funding to that organisation, and that hasn't realised.
Through you, Chair, I can answer that one. It's simply a matter of the timing of the invoices coming in for that amount of money. So we're just waiting for the invoice for Environment South and for the final portion.
Okay.
So that'll be received before the annual report?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's me done. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Councillors, are there any further questions? If not, the 5 recommendations have been moved and seconded. I'll put that. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that, and thank you, Councillor Clark, for your questions. Michael, all clear? I'm not sure. Michael's camera's just flicked back on. So we'll come to the Kumagaya visit for 2023 with regards to the 30th anniversary of the sister city relationship re-signing. I guess the relationship itself has been challenged over the past couple of years with the closure of borders, and we have missed both the incoming and outgoing exchanges, particularly educationally, that regularly take part. But Michael, there are plans to recognise that anniversary initially in January next year, and then later in the year with the return visit.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, everybody. Mr. Chair, thank you. You have largely taken my introduction. But I can say that, yes, that is the plan. Kumagaya plan to visit us in January with a proposed return visit later in the year with the new council to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the signing. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure the Chief Executive is also able to provide some more insight if needed.
Thank you. I note that we're fortunate the Kumagaya Friendship Association here in Invercargill is looking at providing some of the hosting, Claire, which is really useful.
Very keen to.
Good. Your Worship, you've been there since the initial signing. Any comments that you'd like to make, sir?
Yes, well, that was one of the sort of triumphs we had, was that we had the longest serving relationship with Kumagaya, and it of course caused a bit of controversy because it involved a lot of travel, but it was well worth it in terms of about 2,000 students from Kumagaya came here and 1,000 students from here went over there, and there's people who have benefited from that exchange, and I think we should support it as best we can.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Abbott.
Yes, I'm sorry, I've got to be consistent as I have been all through my service with the City Council. I've never agreed with these overseas trips. And again, I'm not going to elaborate on the reasons why. I've heard your or the other side's comments about it's beneficial to students, etc. But I have yet to reflect on any big concrete surplus that's come to the city through sister city relationships. So I'll be voting against the recommendation, as I always have.
Noted. Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I just wanted to say this is a celebration of what I regard as a very successful sister city relationship with this Japanese city, which, as the Mayor has indicated, has been not only successful through the years, but also, and it is only a couple of days since the commemoration of Hiroshima Day on the 6th of August, but to my mind, this sister city relationship has not only been a successful one in a host of important ways, as the Mayor has indicated, but also is an illustration of the importance, the importance for all of us to have these sister city relationships, international friendship relationships, for the importance of world friendship and actually building relationships that will last and that will mean that we do never go down those tracks, such as what happened with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. To me, this has been an extremely successful relationship. We have built friendships that have endured. We have had many young people involved, both in Japan and New Zealand, with our sister city exchanges. We have had some economic benefit for some of our local businesses, and I think for the very small price that we are being asked to contribute here, this has been a valuable and should be a long ongoing relationship, and I've got every intention of voting in favour of this, and I look forward to this relationship continuing long after all of us around this table are sitting at the table. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in commenting in the past, Sir Tim has mentioned the origins of sister city relationships, I think coming as a result of an action from President Eisenhower. Was that right, sir?
Yes.
Yes. Having had the opportunity to visit Hiroshima privately just after the 60th anniversary of the bombing, it was a deeply moving visit where after I saw a statue of a woman shielding her children from the blast, that it became quite emotional for me. And a young girl who was just passing by stopped and sat with me for a while, which was deeply appreciated and very moving. But they just wanted to make sure that people got it and that it didn't happen again. For all the people that has worshipped, the young students that we have hosted here when they have visited, for the schools here that have travelled over to Japan over those 30 years. And we quite often end up hosting Kumagaya students around this time in August, which is their hottest month. And they arrive here in the depths of a Southland winter, which you can see the shock on their faces when they arrive. Similarly, we have gone from here to there, one of the hottest places in Japan, and had the opposite result. But it has changed these people's lives forever. And similarly, I really support it. Sorry, Malavika, did we have a mover and a seconder for the... I'm happy to move.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from councillors? Councillor Kett.
Yeah, thank you. Originally, we had a sister city arrangement, I think it was with Hobart, and it was sort of so close that what they done was similar to what we have done in the past, you know, like rugby, racing and beer and that type of things. But since this association was formed, it's only been a huge benefit for us. A lot of these exchange students have become lifelong friends with their hosts here, and a lot of them have revisited Invercargill when they've become adults and with their spouses and children, and they come back here for a holiday and show their family around the sites, go to down to Bluff and have their photo taken there, and go to Stewart Island, Ulver Island, etc. Like it is a small amount of money to have to spend or outlay. This has been a huge benefit to our city. It's we have more Japanese coming here than us going there, but it's absolutely brilliant, and we should treasure it and treasure them as our friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Yes, Chair. No, I'm opposed to it. I think at a time when we have changed very much to a digital world, that this is a process from the past. And while it might be nice to have students here, those sorts of things can be arranged through schools without us having to trip half a dozen or a dozen people up to Kumagaya on a periodic basis and then coming here as well. I think at a time of new technology that's available to us to explore, that we shouldn't be restricted just to here, to Japan and China. And so I'm opposed to persisting with this sister city arrangement.
Noted. Any other comments? Councillor Scout, then Reverend Cook.
I just challenge Councillor Clark really on the digital experience as to the practical live experience. It's just like chalk and cheese, to be honest. This relationship we've had over 30 years has been fantastic, and the intrinsic value to the city has been wonderful. I think it'd be extremely remiss. I can only support His Worship, Councillor Soper, Councillor Kett. I believe it's paramount that we continue the relationship going forward.
Thank you. Reverend Cook.
Yes, Mr. Chair. As part of both Te Rūnaka Waihopai and Te Rūnaka Awaroa, who host regularly Kumagaya, I have to say that what we experience during that visit is the appreciation that the committee, the people who come from Kumagaya have of the fact that Indigenous people within this country play a role, a conspicuous role in hosting and all those sorts of things. That is not actually the normal experience necessarily within Japan as a whole. There are some places in Japan, obviously, that have their own Indigenous population that have some sort of independent identity, but it's not quite expressed the same as we have here. They also really appreciate the experience of the seafoods and things that we have here that are not as accessible as they are. That is something that you cannot do over a Zoom link. You need to be there to see and smell and taste. What we're doing when we're hosting people, we're building friendships, we're making peace, we're making amends for the past, both of us, both sides. But we're also establishing a platform for a wider understanding of how we all come to be in the place where we are. As a child who grew up in the immediate post-war era and heard my grandparents talk about Japan, and I have to say, looking back, quite offensive terms, I find it incredibly satisfying to be part of a process that takes away that quite unpleasant characterisation of a people who did what was expected of them by the government of their time, by the leadership of their time, and we responded as we did following the leadership of our time. we're now setting a new platform. If we don't continue this into the next generation and the generation after that, it's really easy. We watch it all the time for people to undermine what become the polite norms of society. I would think that the price of being the hosts and likewise being the manuhiri, if we go to Japan later next year, is of nothing compared to not having our young people go and die as my father's generation did. If we can play a small part in making sure that we establish all those relationships going forward and we continue to grow them and we continue to enhance them, the price that we pay as a city and compared to what we get back by our young people going, by us experiencing cultures that are not our normal everyday thing, but also setting a platform of friendship that next time somebody wants to say something unpleasant about New Zealand, they might think, but actually the people in Invercargill that I went and had tea with, they're New Zealanders. They're actually not bad people. Let's not go down that path. These actions start with one person to another person, one human being to another human being, and you don't get that via Zoom, and you certainly can't shake their hand, you can't sit with them as they eat, and you can't show them your heart and your soul via Zoom as you can when they're sitting next to you at a food table. So I will be voting to support this motion.
Thank you. Just before I put
I've got a further comment.
Go on then, Peter.
Have a second bite of the cherry. Yeah, this relationship between both cities has opened a lot of doors in the past, business doors I'm talking about, for local businesses, and some of the things I've just scribbled down in front of me, the export of wood products from Invercargill to Japan, honey, ice cream, power shell jewellery, dairy products and meat products. That's only a handful of things that I know that go from here to Japan, and it opens the doors, and the people just when they come here they just worship the mayor. I suppose that's why we call him his worship. But to be fair, it's a great relationship we have, and we should embrace it, as others have said.
Thank you. It should not go without loss that I visited 2 factories where a significant amount of Tiwai aluminium is processed into further products as well. Just before I put the motion, councillors, I'll remind you all we're doing is receiving the report and endorsing the unbudgeted expenditure for hosting them when they visit in January. The outgoing visit back to Kumagaya is a consideration for the next council. So with that clarification, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against?
No.
So Councillor Abbott and Councillor Clark, you would like your votes recorded?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Noted. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to the activities report. In the absence of Trudy, who's drawn the short straw? Was there a goose down there?
Kia kato.
Welcome, Richard.
I'll take the activities report as read, and I won't insult you by mentioning we've had a pandemic for the last 2 years, so we take that as a given. No major things to draw your attention to here. Happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Richard. Councillors, you've had a chance to have a look through the activities report. Do you have any questions at this point?
No.
There are none. Would somebody like to move that the report
I'll
is
move.
received? Moved Councillor Abbott,
Second.
seconded by Councillor Lewis. I'll put that then. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. Councillors, that brings us to the end of the public session. Thank you to those people who've joined us on Zoom. We'll be going into public excluded to confirm the minutes of the PE session of the Wellbeing Fund and Performance Policy and Partnerships from July 12 for the reasons as outlined in the agenda. Also move if there's a seconder. Councillor Scout, thank you. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We are in committee. Thank you for those who've joined us on Zoom.
Mr. Chair.